You know, if it's not about sports, I find it very hard to concentrate.
What's up, guys? It's Braden here from Dragon King Sports, and today is the first installment of my Dead Team series. As you know, I have a Dead Stadium series, but today I am starting a Dead Team series. Today we are going over the Montreal Expos baseball team, who exists today as the Washington Nationals. Professional baseball in Montreal actually existed long before the Expos became a team. Montreal actually had a minor league team as far back as the 1800s when the Montreal Royals were founded in 1897, and they played in the Eastern League. The Royals played until 1917 but were brought back in 1928 to play in the International League and operated as the Brooklyn Dodgers AAA affiliate starting in 1939. And that proved to be the best thing to happen to the Montreal Royals, who won several International League championships and Junior World Series titles under the management of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Not only that, but Jackie Robinson actually played for the Montreal Royals before breaking the Major League color barrier in 1947. Unfortunately for fans in Montreal, the Royals would only last until the year 1960, mainly due to declining attendance. And you'll see as we go along, this becomes a pattern from fans in Montreal. The Dodgers had moved to Los Angeles 3 years prior in 1957, and Major League teams typically like to have a AAA affiliate that's close to their home base. Plus, not making money off of attendance was a big factor that culminated in the Royals being sold and relocated. Almost immediately after the Royals were sold and relocated, Montreal Mayor Jean Drapeau began to campaign aggressively for an MLB team. And I apologize, guys, there's lots of French in this video, and I apologize if I butcher it. I'm doing the best I can. The city was too late to submit its candidacy for the 1962 expansion, but he tried again when the league's owners and executives gathered for their annual winter meeting. Drapeau pitched the idea in 1967, and a year later, on May 27, 1968, his wish was granted. National League President Warren Giles announced expansion teams would be granted to Montreal and San Diego, while in the American League, expansion franchises would be granted to Kansas City and Seattle. The San Diego squad in the National League would be known as the Padres, while Montreal, despite many people clamoring for the team to name the franchise the Royals in honor of the old International League team, couldn't do so because the name Royals was already taken by the Kansas City expansion franchise. The Seattle franchise in the American League would be known as the Pilots. Those of you who have watched my Dead Stadium series videos will know. As in my Kingdom video, I briefly mentioned the Seattle Pilots. The name Expos was chosen, not only because it has the same spelling in French as it does in English, but it also pays homage to Expo 67 World's Fair, which took place in Montreal. Blue, red, and white was chosen as the color scheme. The next step was finding a venue to play at, and Executive Committee Chairman Jerry Snyder built a group of 6 partners led by financier Jean-Louis Levesque and Seagram heir Charles Bronfman. Levesque eventually dropped out, and Bronfman took over the whole operation. The task at hand was to find a home for the Expos for at least 2 seasons until another stadium could be built. Jean Drapeau, the mayor, told the National League that they would build a dome stadium due to the cold weather in April and early May, and towards the end of the season in October. He also made a big promise that the stadium would be completed by 1971, but Jerry Snyder's successor of the executive chairman position, Lucien Saulnier, told the NL to just slow down and that Jean Drapeau had no right to promise what he promised. The Expos, along with the 3 other expansion teams, were set to begin play in 1969, but by 1968, stadium plans had still not made progress. Delormier Stadium was proposed but rejected because it could not be expanded beyond its 20,000 seat capacity due to being right in the middle of a residential area. The Autostade, home of the Canadian Football League's Montreal Alouettes, also could not be used due to the cost of adding a dome. By August of 1968, the stadium issue had still not been resolved, and the franchise's future was in doubt before they had even played a single inning. Rumors floated around that the NL would instead award the expansion franchise to Buffalo if the Expos management did not figure out a place to play and quick. Finally, the 3,000-seat Jerry Park was chosen, and the NL approved of it on the condition that it be expanded to 30,000 seats. This project was going to cost about $1 million, and this money was handed over, despite the fact that the venue was only going to be used temporarily.
1969 was significant to Canadian baseball fans, especially those in Montreal. It marked the coming of the international era of Major League Baseball, the arrival of the Expos, a team destined to draw more than 250,000 fans, 1.25 million, in their opening year in Jerry Park. When the Expos gathered at West Palm Beach for their training camp, the players and coaching staff had to be introduced to each other. But on opening day, they didn't play that way at Shea Stadium in New York.
The Expos, led by manager Gene Mauch, played its first game on April 8, 1969 against the New York Mets. It resulted in an 11-10 victory for the Expos. The team played its first home game on April 14th, which was an 8-7 victory over the St. Louis Cardinals, before a crowd of 29,000 people. 3 days later, Expos pitcher Bill Stoneham pitched the first no-hitter in franchise history on the road against the Philadelphia Phillies. Despite the fact that the Expos started out hot, they soon succumbed to the trials and struggles of being an expansion team and finished tied for last place in the National League with the other NL expansion team, the San Diego Padres. They finished with a record of 52-110 in their first season. The next two seasons were not much better, finishing 73-89 in 1970 and 71-90 in 1971. An early star for the young franchise was right fielder Rusty Staub, who had bright orange hair and was affectionately referred to by fans as Le Grand Orange. Staub was actually an all-star in 1969, 1970, and 1971, and even learned French while playing for the Expos, which made the fans love him even more. Another popular player in those early days was pitcher Claude Raymond, who was the team's first French-Canadian player. Pitcher Carl Morton won National League Rookie of the Year in 1970 for the Expos with a pitching record of 18-11. Pitcher Bill Stoneham threw yet another no-no against the New York Mets on October 2nd, 1972, this time at home. It was the first ever no-hitter thrown outside of the United States. Despite some early promise and some young stars on the team, the Expos' woes continued. They continued to have losing season after losing season for their first 10 years of existence. Their best record during those first 10 years was in 1974 when they went 79-82. Due to losing a lot, fan engagement began to dwindle, and by the 1976 season, the attendance had absolutely fallen off a cliff, dropping to record lows by drawing only 600,000 fans during that season. For context, that's an average of about 7,000 fans per game when you factor in how much their stadium actually held. The team had intended to use Olympic Park as a permanent stadium because it was bigger and more Major League friendly, but due to delays and costs starting to pile up, the Expos were forced to stay put through the 1976 season. Bronfman threatened to move his company Seagram and his family out of Montreal if the political party, Parti Quebec, I hope I said that right, won the majority government in the 1976 election. This made fans worry if the Expos would also move. The political party that he didn't want to win, I'm not going to repronounce it, I'm sorry, did in fact win the election, but Bronfman turned out to be all talk because he didn't do anything. This French stuff is kicking my ass, guys. The Expos finally moved into their new home, Olympic Stadium, in 1977. Also in 1977, a second Canadian team joined the MLB, the Toronto Blue Jays. A natural rivalry was formed with the Blue Jays, and the annual series was known as the Pearson Cup. 8 Pearson Cup series were played between the Blue Jays and Expos in an 8-year stretch, and they only missed one season of playing each other during that time period, which was 1981, due to a players' strike. The Expos moved into their new home of Olympic Stadium, starting with the 1977 season. Now, Olympic Stadium was a major upgrade for the Expos. It didn't have a roof until 1987, so early in the season it was often bitter cold, and in some years it even got chilly in September. The venue, despite being an upgrade, was still not without its issues. Artificial turf caused injuries, and thin padding on the outfield fence caused some injuries as well. In 1978, the Expos introduced their first mascot, Suki, which resembled Mr. Met but in an Expos uniform. Suki was hated by the fans, even once being attacked by a man after his child was frightened by the big scary baseball head. The Expos soon ditched Suki and hired Bonnie Erickson, who had designed the Muppet Miss Piggy, to come up with a new mascot, and what she delivered would actually outlive the Expos organization. The creature was called Youpi, which means yippee in French. Today he still exists, but belongs to a different team and a different sport, the Montreal Canadiens of the National Hockey League. Youpi also holds the distinctive title of being the first mascot to be ejected from an MLB game. Youpi had been dancing on top of the Dodgers dugout, much to the chagrin of Dodgers skipper Tommy Lasorda. Lasorda complained to the umpires, who promptly tossed out Youpi. Eventually, Youpi was allowed to return, but under the condition that he would not go near the Dodgers dugout. Despite continuing to lose, the Expos began building a solid young core. Let me introduce you to some characters. Gary Carter became known as one of the best catchers and best hitters in the Major League at the time. Pitcher Steve Rogers, who has just too much swag to handle. I mean, look at that mustache. And outfielders Andre Dawson and Tim Raines all shined for the Expos in the 1970s. The Expos were able to acquire future Hall of Famer Tony Perez in 1977, and Dick Williams was hired as the team's manager the same year. Williams was known to foster young talent and develop them well. He had been the manager of the Oakland Athletics when they won back-to-back World Series championships in 1972 and 1973. The Expos were finally what could be considered a respectable team in 1979, leading the NL East by 6.5 games in mid-July. However, they ended up finishing second in the NL East next to the Pittsburgh Pirates, and despite a 95-65 record, did not qualify for the postseason. However, fans felt hopeful due to having a young core and posting their best record that they ever had up to that point. The Expos won 5 fewer games the following season in 1980, but finished a mere 1 game behind the division champion and eventual World Series champion Philadelphia Phillies. Yet again, however, they did not qualify for the playoffs. The Expos had promise, though. Pitcher Steve Rogers was quickly becoming one of the best pitchers in the majors, and Andre Dawson always had a hot bat in those days, it seemed like. 1981 seemed to be the year of high hopes for the Expos. Boasting some of the best talent in the National League, praise was heaped on the Expos, and expectations were high. Charlie Villa pitched the third no-hitter in franchise history that season on May 10th in a 4-0 victory against the San Francisco Giants. Now, the Expos had a 30-25 record and were only in third place in the NL East, which was very underwhelming for what was expected that season. A strike halted the 1981 season, and by the time play resumed, so many games had been missed that Major League Baseball elected to split the season in 2, which gave everyone a clean slate for the second half of the season. The teams in first place in their respective divisions in the first half would meet the winners of the division in the second half in a best-of-5 series that would precede each league's championship series. The defending world champion Phillies had won the NL East in the first half of the season, so the Expos were playing for the division crown in the second half, and the right faced the defending champs. The Expos knew that a change had to be made if they expected to have a shot at winning the NL East in the second half. They fired their manager Dick Williams and hired scouting director Jim Fanning. The team still struggled, though, having a .500 record with 15 games left to play. But suddenly, the team caught fire, winning 11 games down the stretch and barely winning the division, finishing a half game over the Pittsburgh Pirates to take the division crown. The Expos knew how difficult of a challenge was lying ahead, though. The Phillies were the defending champions and a powerhouse. Montreal shocked everyone by winning the first 2 games of the best-of-5 series, putting the champs on the ropes. They dropped their next 2 games, though, which set up a winner-take-all Game 5. Steve Rogers was on the mound for Montreal, and he shined in the spotlight, pitching a complete game shutout with the Expos defeating the Phillies 3-0 to advance to the National League Championship Series, where they would face the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Dodgers had several great players. Once again, the Expos knew they were in for a challenge. Montreal readied themselves to face yet another stellar squad. The first 3 games were in Dodger Stadium, and the Expos actually led the series 2-1 heading back to their home field, Olympic Stadium. Now, this was before Olympic Stadium had a roof put in, and Game 4 was in mid-October. The Expos knew that the Dodgers, who were used to sunny Southern California, had a disadvantage in the bitter cold of the Great White North. But perhaps because of this, or maybe in spite of it, the Dodgers put forth one of their best efforts of the series, defeating the Expos 7-1 to tie the series at 2 apiece and setting up yet another winner-take-all Game 5. The deciding game was actually postponed due to freezing cold rain. The game was scheduled for the following day, and although rainy, it was still bitter cold. The Expos faithful turned up at Olympic Stadium to see what could be history. The game was tied 1-1 entering the 9th inning, and manager Jim Fanning decided to have Steve Rogers, who is normally a starter and not a cleanup guy, come in the game. Rogers got the first 2 batters out before facing Rick Monday, who was one of the best hitters in the majors at that time. On a 3-1 count, Rogers pitched a sinker, which Monday attacked with gusto.
At first, too. Dawson chasing back. Still on the run. Trouble at the fence. Home run Monday. 2-1 Dodgers.
Trailing 2-1 entering the bottom of the 9th inning, the Expos could not tie the game, and they were defeated in Game 5 and eliminated from the playoffs. The incident became known as Blue Monday among Expos faithful. Steve Rogers was interviewed after the game and gave the reporter just a little bit of attitude.
Steve, looking back on the season, everything that's happened, how do you evaluate the season now? How do you look back on the season?
You're asking me 45 minutes after the game how I look back on the season. I look back on it that I was 1 pitch short of making it a fairy tale ending.
Hope wasn't completely lost, however. The Expos had an excellent and youthful bullpen, boasting 4 starting pitchers under the age of 23. The Expos hosted the 1982 All-Star Game at Olympic Stadium on July 13th of that year. 5 Expos players made the NL squad. Pitcher Steve Rogers, catcher Gary Carter, right fielder Andre Dawson, left fielder Tim Raines, and also first baseman Al Oliver was named as a reserve. It was only the second time since 1969 that a host team had 4 starters. The National League won 4-1 that season in front of a packed, sellout crowd of 59,000 people. And as fate would have it, Steve Rogers was the winning pitcher. That same season, in 1982, the Expos were a major favorite to win the NL East. With a loaded and young roster, the sky looked to be the limit. Sports Illustrated predicted the Expos to win the NL East, as did Baseball Digest. But sadly, the team fell short of those expectations by a lot. They finished 3rd in their division with an 86-76 record and failed to qualify for the postseason. Manager Jim Fanning was replaced with Bill Verdon in 1983, and the team led the NL East in mid-July. However, the Expos had a second-half collapse, finishing 82-80. The Expos had won more games in the past 5 seasons than anyone else in the NL East, but only had 1 postseason appearance to show for it. The Expos landed Pete Rose in 1984, who would eventually become the all-time hits leader in MLB history, but at this point in time was second on the list to Ty Cobb. Rose was 42 years old and far from his prime, but the Expos hoped to squeeze some production out of the aging superstar. He was signed to a 1-year contract with hopes that the Expos could make a run at another NL East title. Rose reached the 4,000 career hit mark with Montreal, doing so on April 13, 1984, in a 5-1 victory over the Phillies at Olympic Stadium. But despite this accomplishment, largely he was ineffective, having a batting average of only .259 and didn't hit any home runs in the 95 games he spent with Montreal before he was traded back to the team he had the most success with, the Cincinnati Reds. One thing you might have gathered already, but something that I have not stated outright, is that Expos fans are extremely fair weather. That is to say, they only attend games and support the team when they are doing well. The Expos went 78-83 in 1984, which resulted in a 31% decrease in attendance. The Expos traded franchise cornerstone and future Hall of Famer Gary Carter to the New York Mets on December 10, 1984. Carter had been a fan favorite, partially due to his play on the field, but also due to the fact that, just like Rusty Staub before him, he had learned French while in Montreal to endear himself to the fans there. Andre Dawson was set to be a free agent after the 1986 season. The Expos, not wanting to lose him, but also not wanting to have to pay him a lot of money, decided to do something that I personally think is pretty grimy. They commented publicly on how he had issues with his knee, which caused interest in him to just plummet. Dawson was angry and decided to walk into the Chicago Cubs training camp with a blank contract with his signature on it. The Cubs signed Dawson to a one-year $500,000 contract, which was less than half of what he made the previous season in Montreal. Fueled by his anger, Dawson hit 49 home runs and drove in 137 runs in 1987, winning NL MVP. Tim Raines returned to Montreal, however, and had one of his best seasons ever in 1987, leading the NL in runs with 123, stealing 50 bases, and batting .330 with 18 homers. He was also named the MVP of the 1987 All-Star Game hosted by the Oakland Athletics. The Expos basically hovered near 500 in the following seasons, and top brass decided it was time to start a rebuild. Charles Bronfman became troubled with trying to get fans to show up to games, because, as I said previously, these Expos fans were as fair weather as it gets. In 1989, Bronfman made one of the most horrible decisions of his tenure in charge. He traded future Hall of Fame pitcher Randy Johnson, who was only 25 years old at the time, for pitcher Mark Langston. The Mariners ended up the winners of this trade, as Johnson would be a star in Seattle, while Langston struggled to produce the desired results in Montreal. And Langston wouldn't even stick around either. He left in free agency after the conclusion of that season. The Expos finished the 1989 season with an 81-81 record and did not qualify for the playoffs. Charles Bronfman was fed up and started looking for someone to sell the team to. His asking price was $50 million, but that proved to be a tough sell. However, one group offered to purchase the team for $135 million and relocate it to Miami, but Bronfman decided against it, not wanting the team to be relocated. Businessman Robert E. Rich, who definitely had a last name that fit him, offered $100 million and intended to relocate the team to Buffalo, but was also met with the same response by Bronfman. The city of Montreal agreed to put up $33 million of the now $100 million price tag, after which 11 other Canadian corporations agreed to buy minority stakes, including Bell Canada, which is kind of like Canada's version of AT&T. The sale was made official on November 29, 1990. Right away, Tim Raines was traded to the Chicago White Sox. A new manager was hired named Tim Runnels, a former player in Cincinnati that had no experience coaching. On July 28, 1991, Expos pitcher Dennis Martinez achieved one of the rarest feats in baseball. He pitched a perfect game, 27 up, 27 down. At the time, it was only the 13th perfect game in the history of the majors. Dave Van Horn's iconic call of El Presidente El Perfecto went down in history as one of the most iconic phrases in baseball history. The catcher for that perfect game was Ron Hassey, who a decade earlier had been the catcher for Cleveland Indian pitcher Len Barker's perfect game against the Toronto Blue Jays, making Hassey the only player in MLB history to be a catcher in two separate perfect games. Later in the 1991 season, a 50-ton beam collapsed from Olympic Stadium. The rest of the 1991 season was spent on the road for the Expos, and the organization said it was a possibility that the first half of the 1992 season would be too. It was soon decided to keep the roof closed at all times due to the fact that it could not be open if it was really windy or bad weather or pretty much any time, and also it was a public safety risk. The Expos floundered in 1991, finishing 71-90 and last in the NL East, and attendance was very poor, with less than 1 million showing up for the season. The Expos had a solid foundation, though, with players such as Larry Walker and Marquise Grissom being bright spots on a horrible team. The team also acquired star right fielder Moises Alou from Pittsburgh. In 1993, the Expos traded for pitcher Pedro Martinez, who had a solid previous 2 seasons with the Dodgers, and heading into the 1994 season, it was widely recognized that Montreal had one of the best rosters in baseball. But the fact that the Atlanta Braves, who were considered one of the favorites to win the World Series, had moved from the NL West to the NL East, created a challenge for the Expos' hopes to win another NL East title. By the time they faced the Braves in June, Montreal was only 2.5 games back from them, and Montreal won 2 out of the 3 games in the series, including one against future Hall of Famer Greg Maddux. The Expos increased their division lead over Atlanta in mid-July and early August. In a 23-game span between July 18th and August 11th, the Expos went 20-3. During this 1994 campaign, 5 players were named to the NL All-Star team: Moises Alou, Will Cordero, Darren Fletcher, Marquise Grissom, and Ken Hill. By August 12th of the 1994 season, the Expos had a record of 74-40, which was on pace for 106 wins, their best ever. The Expos held the best record in the majors, and a second postseason appearance in franchise history looked to be on the horizon. However, probably the worst thing that could happen did. The players went on strike.
The Expos leave the field in first place, yet wondering if their best season ever's in jeopardy. Even so, they're prepared to sit it out for as long as it takes.
It doesn't matter how we've been playing. Of course, this is probably our best year playing, but we're talking about the whole game of baseball. You know, we didn't want to strike. We didn't want this to happen, but we have no other choice but to go out and take care of ourselves in the game of baseball.
Every game is every game, and you know, if this is the last game, you know, until we strike, which, you know, it probably will be, so be it. You know, we've got to do what we've got to do.
There's a little bit more intelligence on both sides than people really give credit for, and I think when everything's said and done and the rhetoric stops and they really get down to, you know, really laying out some facts on both sides, that we'll get something done.
The labor dispute was expected to be resolved by Labor Day of 1994. However, the holiday came and went without a resolution. On September 14th, the remainder of the season was canceled, which was an absolute dagger in the hearts of Expos fans. For a franchise as tortured as the Montreal Expos, this was horribly bad luck. Team president Claude Brochu tried to keep the 1994 squad together, but in doing so, realized that the team would lose an estimated $25 million in 1995 if the team would have stayed together, which would put the Expos on the brink of bankruptcy. Brochu realized he had to let some of the players go, most notably Marquise Grissom and Larry Walker. Fans were upset at management for getting rid of them, and game attendance once again plummeted. Things were equally bad on the field, with the team finishing last in the NL East in 1995 with a 66-78 record. The fair-weather fans in Montreal refused to show their support, and the Expos never averaged more than 20,000 fans per game ever again. The media was harsh in their criticism of the Expos, calling them a AAA team, and pushing the narrative that the team was unwilling or unable to keep talented players on their roster. Montreal's fan base continued to get smaller and smaller, with less people supporting them in Quebec. Even with them getting rid of most of their top talent from the previous season, the team surprised many in 1996 by fielding a fairly competitive team. They went 88-76 that season and finished second in the NL East, but despite the turnaround, they could not clinch a wildcard spot. The remainder of the 1990s was tough for the Expos, having a losing record in every season to close out the 20th century, and never once finishing higher than fourth in the NL East. However, one bright spot was present in the midst of all this: pitcher Pedro Martinez. He won the Cy Young Award in 1997, becoming the first and only Expo player to do so. 1 week after it was announced that he was the winner, the Expos traded him to the Boston Red Sox as part of yet another salary purge. By this point, there were so few Expos fans in the area that stores in the area didn't even bother trying to sell Expos merchandise, and a friend of Moises Alou who visited to watch him play recalled that he didn't even see anyone in the city wearing Expos merch in the entire week he spent in Montreal. When Alou's friend took a taxi cab to Olympic Stadium to watch him play, the driver didn't even know where the entrance was, nor were there signs anywhere advertising that a game was taking place. Management was so bad at marketing that it was no wonder that there were barely any fans. Team president Claude Brochu, meanwhile, was hard at work at something else, convincing the ownership group that they needed to replace Olympic Stadium. Free agents often cited its poor playing conditions as reasons they wouldn't sign with Montreal. A proposal was made to build a 35,000-seat facility to be called Labatt Park, and it was anticipated to be ready by opening day 2001 if they could acquire funding. Brochu sought $150 million from the provincial government, but the Premier of Quebec, which, if you don't know, a premier is essentially like the equivalent of a state governor, did not go for the idea, saying that he could not issue funds because they were still paying for the repairs that were made to the Olympic Stadium years prior. Many members of the ownership group wanted to sell the team, and attendance continued to get even worse as tensions rose. However, one of the few reasons to be positive was none other than Vladimir Guerrero, a Dominican-born player who had made 4 consecutive All-Star squads with the Expos. Guerrero would eventually be elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame, but for now he was just a rising star with the moniker Vlad the Impaler. By 1999, tensions between Brochu and the rest of the owners was reaching a boiling point. Someone was leaking their conversations to the French media to make Brochu look bad, and the rest of the partners began to openly question Brochu's ability to make good business decisions. The few fans that were left were against Brochu too, and he was soon ousted and replaced by Jeffrey Loria, who many believed could be the franchise's savior. When Loria took over, he made it known that this nonsense of not spending money on players and letting them leave in free agency was going to come to an end. He promised to build a better overall culture that he called, quote, a winning attitude with winning players. Loria backed this up by taking money out of his own pocket and putting it back into helping out the organization, slowly buying out the other owners and increasing his ownership stake to 92%. However, a lot of big-name free agents still didn't want to come to Montreal, due to the franchise's shaky future and the fact that attendance was such an issue. As a result, trading to get talent was considered necessary, and as such, first baseman Lee Stevens was acquired from the Texas Rangers via trade in the year 2000. Increased payroll due to Loria was enough to coax a few moderate-level free agents to come to Montreal, with the Expos signing pitchers Grammy Lloyd and Hideki Irabu. Misfortune would befall the Expos yet again, as Lloyd missed the entire 2000 season due to arthroscopic surgery, and Irabu posted a dismal 7.24 ERA, while Lee Stevens had a horrible batting average of .265. The Expos went 64-95 in 2000. At this point, it wasn't just fans who had quit on the team. Even businesses refused to advertise at the park or support the Expos at all. Loria, however, took one idea from Brochu, and that was the idea to try and find someone willing to fund construction of a new ballpark. He sought support from the government of Quebec and architectural firm HOK Sport. He still wanted to build Labatt Park, but it had to be redesigned to be more cost-effective. But the MLB thought the new stadium would be structurally unsound, and the idea was sent back to the drawing board. In order to get some cash flow, Loria attempted to renegotiate the Expos broadcasting deals, because they were much less than any other team had. He completely broke off all negotiations with the sports network, also known as TSN, which was the largest English-speaking sports network in all of Canada. TSN only offered the team $200,000, which Loria took as an insult. Loria also had problems with English-speaking radio networks, as they would only air Expo games if Loria paid for airtime. The French-speaking radio stations, however, still aired Expos games, so due to the fact that Expos games were not televised in English, nor broadcast on the radio in English, the fans who didn't speak French had to rely solely on internet audiocasts, which oftentimes were very poor in quality. In 2001, the MLB planned to eliminate 2 teams, the Expos and the Minnesota Twins. The owners voted 28-2 in favor of eliminating them, and I'm sure you can guess which 2 voted against it. Initially, it was planned for each franchise to play their final seasons in 2002 before being eliminated, but the Twins filed a legal suit as well as the MLPA. The Twins were saved, and since the MLB could not find another team to eliminate along with the Expos, they were saved too, due to the fact that the MLB needed to keep an even number of teams for scheduling purposes. Shortly after this ordeal, Loria gave up on saving the Expos, gave up on rebuilding the culture, and sold the team to the MLB. He used the money he got from the sale to purchase the Florida Marlins, who were sold to him by John Henry, who in turn purchased the Boston Red Sox. Loria, being the dirty little rat he was, took everything with him to South Florida, including computers, supplies, and even scouting reports. This also meant that the proposed Labatt Park would not come to fruition, although realistically it probably wasn't going to happen even if Loria had stayed. The MLB, as proud new owners of a terrible team with no fans, organized a group called Expos Baseball LP, a partnership that included representatives from the 29 other teams to oversee the club. They appointed Anaheim Angels president Tony Tavares as team president, which to me seems like a conflict of interest, but whatever. Mets general manager Omar Minana was named a vice president, general manager, and operating head of the franchise, which once again seems like a conflict of interest, but I digress. Minana walked into a disaster of an organization. He had actually been hired only 72 hours before the start of spring training, and there were only 6 employees in the Expos organization. The others had either been given jobs by Loria with the Marlins, or they had been offered jobs by other teams. Many speculated the 2002 season would be the Expos' final season. Montreal's 2002 home opener against none other than Loria's Marlins drew 34,000 fans, far more than usual. Many showed up just to show their disgust and hatred for Loria. Soon, the other previous owners of the Expos, who had essentially been pushed out by Loria, filed a RICO suit against him. The partners' lawsuit claimed that Loria had conspired with the MLB to push them out and sell the team to the MLB, thus destroying their profits and the franchise's future. The case ended up being dismissed. On the field, the Expos were surprisingly good in 2002. They were actually in the playoff race for most of the season. Since Minaya thought the Expos were in their final season, he made a blockbuster trade for Bartolo Colon that he hoped would be one last chance at a postseason glory for the Montreal Expos. Colon had been a stellar pitcher for several years for the Cleveland Indians and was in his prime in 2002. Like I have talked about in a previous video, the Mariners were able to get the state of Washington to agree to fund a new stadium based off of one playoff run in 1995. So Minaya hoped the same would be true for the province of Quebec. However, the baseball gods were not about to let this happen. The Expos lost their momentum late in the season and finished with an 83-79 record, which was their first winning season since 1996, but still not good enough to clinch a wildcard spot, despite finishing second in the NL East. The Expos, being on life support at this point, were saved yet again, this time by a brand new collective bargaining agreement, which forbid the MLB to eliminate any teams until at least 2006. This was good news for the few fans who were still riding with the Expos, but it was plainly obvious that the MLB, who now owned the team, did not want them around. In 2003, the Expos again found themselves in the thick of the playoff race. Late in the season, on August 29th, the team was in a 4-way tie for a wildcard berth. However, yet again, the team faded late into the season, finishing with an identical 83-79 record that they had the previous season in 2002, and just like 2002, missed the playoffs yet again. After the 2003 season, Vladimir Guerrero left in free agency, and the Expos lost their best player, further proving the narrative that the team is unable to keep talent around for long. In 2004, home games were split between Montreal and San Juan, Puerto Rico. The team started off horribly at 5-19 and never recovered. They finished with a 67-95 record, and on September 29, 2004, the MLB announced that the Expos would relocate to Washington, D.C. and become known henceforth as the Washington Nationals. The same night as this announcement was made, the team played its final home game in the city of Montreal, which was a 9-1 loss to Loria's Marlins in front of 31,000 fans. The team then played its final game as the Expos on October 3rd on the road against the Mets, the same team that they had faced in the franchise's first ever game in 1969. The Mets defeated the Expos 8-1 at Shea Stadium. The franchise ended with an overall losing record over 36 seasons. The last active player to play for the Expos was Bartolo Colon, who last played in 2018 for the Texas Rangers.
Here they are, 1 strike away, 1 out away. 3-2. There it is! The Washington Nationals are world champions for the first time in franchise history.
Oh, what could have been. By the way, Dave Martinez was the manager for that 2019 Nationals team that won the World Series, and he played for the Expos from 1988 to 1991. The same season that they won the World Series in 2019, the Nationals actually wore Expos throwback uniforms. It's kind of sad that such a cool team in such a cool city with such a unique swag about them was ruined by poor management, fans who couldn't care less, and a bad stadium that no one could figure out a solution to. Now guys, I was just 9 years old the last time the Expos existed, and although I remember watching them play, vaguely, I didn't have a clue about any of this stuff till I started researching it. To me, one day the Expos were just there and the next, the Nationals were in their place. Sadly, despite Charles Bronfman's son, Steven Bronfman, saying that he's hopeful to one day bring the Expos back, the MLB has already rejected this plan once. It looks as though the Expos will remain a dead team. Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you have not already, leave a comment for the algorithm, and peace out.